Hey there everyone, how are we doing? I hope you've all had a good and safe week. This week we are looking at another case that centres around Bristol. I told you last week that I moved to Bristol a year ago. Now the only reason I'm doing another Bristol one so soon is because the perpetrator from this case actually only got sentenced like 2 weeks ago. We moved here just over a year ago, and within like 3 weeks of us moving, my mum phoned me and was like, "Are you glad you moved to Bristol?" I was like, "Why? What's the problem?" And she's like, "Turn on the news, check out the bridge." I'm telling you that I turned on the news and what I saw was fucking terrifying. As always, I have to advise viewers' discretion because the video will contain some rather graphic descriptions. But with that, I invite you to sit back, get cozy, and join me into a glimpse of a darker reality. This story starts in the year 2012 with a caring and loving couple called Paul Longworth, who was 59, and Albert Alfonso, who was 50. They were, at the time, on the internet trying to find new people to be friends with, to have a sexual connection with. They were out looking for new people to introduce to their life. We do not kink shame on this channel, and I know for a fact that they are not the only people in the world to ever have done this. And they were just looking for new connections. And they ended up meeting a man called Yostin Mosquera, who was from Colombia. Mosquera was 22 at the time. There are some implications that he may have been a sex worker, whether he was making porn films or selling photos of himself. I couldn't get complete clarification. Either way, he was making money out of selling some form of sexual content on the internet. Again, no kink shaming, sex work is valid work. Anyway, the three men hit it off famously. They ended up actually talking for several hours on the first night that they met. They were vibing really well together. And after the initial night, this continued, and it very quickly became part of a daily routine that Paul and Albert would talk with Joseph for at least an hour every day. So, as you can expect, over time, the men became very, very close. They formed a really tight bond. This actually lasted for a really long time. So, if we fast forward 10 years, so to 2022, the three men are still in contact, and they are still talking to each other nearly every day via the internet. So by 2022, Longford and Alfonso decided that they actually wanted to visit Colombia and they wanted to meet Mosquera for the first time in person. And Mosquera seemed pretty up for this. He encouraged them to book the flights and to come on the holiday. So they did, and they seem to have had a wonderful time. The three guys clicked immediately. Apparently the sexual chemistry was on fire, and they had a fantastic few days making some wonderful memories. So after a few days, Longford and Alfonso headed home, and I can imagine the sense of relief between all of the men. Between all of them. I mean, I made a lot of friends online while I was streaming, and like when you meet people in real life and they are the person that you expect them to be, the relief is unimaginable. There are far too many people now in the world who are talking to people online pretending to be somebody they are not. So there's always a fear when you meet somebody who you've only spoken to online that they're not going to be that person. But it's something that is a lot more common nowadays. I mean, I met my husband online, I met my partner online, I even met my ex-husband online, and that was like nearly 20 years ago. The internet can be a wonderful thing. However, sometimes it's not, and we'll circle back on that. But yeah, so They returned home with the huge sigh of relief that this had gone as well as it had, and their relationship continued. They continued to talk to each other nearly every day online, and it seems like almost too good to be true, which of course it is, because otherwise why would I be telling you the tale of them? So for the next 2 years afterwards, so between 2022 and 2024, Longford and Alfonso would repeatedly offer to Mosquera to come to London. They had a flat in Shepherd's Bush together, and they wanted him to visit. I don't know if the intention was for him to stay for a long time or just to have a long visit. I'm not sure, but they invited him. They knew that he had less money, so they offered to pay for his flight. They offered to pick him up from the airport. They offered to pay for everything while he was over, and they even said to him that he could stay at their flat. So after several offers, Mosquera eventually said yes, and in 2024 he came over to London, and as I said, they met him at the airport, and then they took him back to their flat, and again everything seemed wonderful. The three guys just hit it off. They get on really, really well. The sexual dynamics seem to have changed, and I don't know if that's purely because of age. Longworth was slightly older, and he seemed to have sat more on the sidelines when it came to the sexual relationship. But Alfonso and Mosquera had a very active sex life. They would invite other people into the bed, and it was all to the knowledge of Longworth. Longworth was not being kept in the dark about any of it. He just preferred to stay on the sidelines. And Alfonso actually had a little bit of an extra kink, and he videotaped everything. Every time that there was a sexual encounter, he would set up the video camera as normal, and record everything. And from what I can gather, this wasn't a new thing. This is something he had done for years. But I don't think he intended to capture quite what he did on film. But I'm, again, jumping ahead of myself. So, as I say, they invited other people into the bed. And everything seems to just work really, really well between the three of them. The dynamic seems to work really well. There is some implication that Alberto was paying Mosquera for his sexual company. However, it was consensual. Whether that was him being given money or not, it was consensual sex, which Mosquera later tried to deny. But there's so much video evidence that it can be seen that it's consensual. What Longworth and Alfonso didn't know was that Mosquera was moving in the shadows, shall we say. He had access to Alfonso's laptop, and unbeknownst to Alfonso, he was accessing Alfonso's bank account, and he had made a note of passwords and bank details, and financial records. He is also known to have used Google to make some quite questionable searches, especially when you look at them all together. He looked up the cost of Longworth and Alfonso's flat, which was about £400,000 to £500,000, which I can imagine was a vast amount of money to Mosquera. As well as looking up the cost of the flat, he also looked up the price of a chest freezer. On its own, looking for the price of a chest freezer seems like nothing. However, when you know what happened in the rest of the case, this is just a huge red flag, and also very damning for him. But the Google searches actually got worse. On the morning of the 8th of July 2024, Mosquera actually Googled where to hit somebody in the head to kill them. Mosquera was in the flat with just Longworth at the time. Alfonso was at work. He came up behind Longworth, placed a carrier bag over his head, and then hit him repeatedly in the head with a hammer. He actually hit Longworth in the head 9 times and fractured his skull. So Longworth collapsed and unfortunately passed away from these actions. Mosquera then made some attempt to clean up and actually hid Longworth's body under the bed. After placing Longworth under the bed, he then Google searched, how long does a body take to decompose? He then placed a knife in the bed for later. He is seen on CCTV meeting up with Alfonso later in the evening, going to the gym as if nothing had happened, and then going back home. He later went on to proposition Alfonso and initiated sex. So Alfonso set the camera up as he always did, and then the two men started to have sex. At one point, Alfonso was on all fours with Mosquera behind him, and Mosquera took the knife that he had hidden in the bed and slashed Alfonso's throat. He then proceeded to continuously stab him. Alfonso was reportedly stabbed 22 times. And on the video, apparently you can hear Alfonso scream, and then you can hear Mosquera laughing, which is just awful. Like, these men have been in some form of relationship for the past 12 years, and Mosquera just laughs at what he's doing. After killing Alfonso, he took the laptop and tried to transfer himself £4,000 out of Alfonso's account, but the transfer didn't actually work. So he then left the flat with Alfonso's bank card and managed to withdraw £900 before the card wouldn't work anymore. And then weirdly made a video of himself in the shower singing and dancing, because, you know, that's the normal thing to do after killing two men you've had a close relationship with for 12 years. So the next day he purchased himself a chest freezer, and he booked himself a man with a van to take him to Bristol. He then set about dismembering the bodies. He placed body parts in 2 suitcases that he had found in the flat. He then placed both of the men's heads in the chest freezer, and any other body parts he couldn't fit in the suitcases. He also messaged Alfonso's work, pretending to be Alfonso, telling them that he wasn't going to be in for a while. When the man with the van arrived, he helped him to put the suitcases into his van. I can't even imagine how horrific that must have been to have found out. Because obviously at the time he didn't know what he was putting into his van, but he did find out, and when he found out, that must have been awful. You must have felt guilt, he must have felt disgusted. You can't even imagine how horrific that must have been to have found out. So Mosquera and this man travel to Bristol, and he's dropped off just by Clifton Bridge. We assume he was going to Clifton Bridge because he wanted to throw the bodies off the side. I don't think he researched the bridge well enough, because the bridge is patrolled. It's quite busy. I believe there's chain link fence to stop things being thrown over the edge of the bridge. But anyway, so he was dropped off, and he tried to pull these suitcases along the bridge. He vastly underestimated how heavy these suitcases were. He was struggling. So he ended up calling for a cab. Now, the cab driver has said that he nearly didn't bother with this because he literally had to go 321 meters up the bridge. But I mean, I can completely understand where the taxi driver's coming from in the sense of a fare's a fare, you're going to take it. But yeah, it seemed very suspicious. Um, and then once he was out of the cab, again, he was struggling. The wheels were buckling. And so he ended up putting one case to the side. I think it was next to some bushes, just out of the way of the the footpath. And he pulled one of the cases up the bridge. After a little while, he stopped to look over the side of the bridge to see if there was anywhere there was a good space to try and throw this suitcase. How he was going to lift it, I have no idea. He can't even fucking pull it. But that's neither here nor there, because that's not relevant. When he went back to the case after having a look, he noticed that there was a puddle forming underneath the suitcase. Of course, the puddle was blood. He tried to swipe at the puddle with his foot, trying to like smear it. This was useless. There was no point in doing this. So he then, in his infinite wisdom, decided to undo his trousers and urinate onto the puddle. He peed on the puddle, hoping that it would dissipate the blood. What it actually did was get the attention of guys who were patrolling the bridge. He made him look incredibly suspicious, and so they came over to see what was happening. They asked him about the case. He told them that it had car parts in it, but they noticed that it was leaking. So they asked him to open the case, at which point he just abandoned both of the suitcases and legged it.
Emergency location. Clifton Suspension Bridge. What's the emergency?
Right, we're going to need some police up here quite urgently, I think. We had a gentleman up here who was dragging a case behind him. The case, the wheels are broken and what have you. He says there's car parts and what have you. We've got to be funny, the case is broken and it looks like it's really heavy and there's blood coming out of it. The guy with the case has run off. We're now with the case, it's blood. We're convinced it's blood.
Luckily, as he was running away, he ran past a cyclist, and the cyclist had the infinite wisdom to follow him. He actually had a camera on the front of his bike, and so he followed Mosquera for a while and managed to get a full face picture of Mosquera, which he was then able to give to the police. Without that, this case may have lasted a lot longer. Mosquera then just disappeared. The police obviously asked for any information the following day. They showed Mosquera's image everywhere. Everyone knew what this guy looked like. And while they were looking for information, somebody actually contacted them to say that they had seen Mosquera getting out of a red van with and getting 2 suitcases out of the back of the van at Clifton Bridge. So they were able to go back through CCTV footage and locate the red van and actually find the number plate. They arrested the van driver, but the van driver was very adamant that he had nothing to do with this. He had no idea what was in the cases. He was just doing a job. But he was able to give a telephone number to the police because he had Mosquera's mobile number and they had been WhatsApping each other. So they then try to track the mobile. Of course, the mobile is off. But they have somebody watching that phone line. Luckily, the police did manage to find a luggage tag on one of the suitcases that had been abandoned by Mosquera. The address on it, however, was actually an ex-partner of Alfonso, and they were able to track him and ascertain that the man was alive quite quickly, but it did also help them to be pointed in the right direction. So they actually managed to get the location of Longworth and Alfonso's flat, and they turned up at the flat and found the horrific scene that had been left behind. There was also a lot of forensic evidence in the flat that just helped point towards Mosquera. He may have attempted to clean up, but he didn't do a very good job of it. There was blood traces and the weapons were still there, and the video evidence was still there as well. And then on the 10th of July, the phone just turns on. And they actually see Mosquera by Clifton Bridge, which is just awful. And then they see him walk through Cabot shopping centre. He walks through the shopping centre with one shoe on and nobody notices. So the police hightailed over to Cabot's. By the time they got there, he was gone. He had already left. But one very clever policeman turned around and said, we should check the train stations. So they made their way to the train stations really, really quickly and actually managed to catch Mosquera at Temple Meads station. He was placed under arrest and brought into the station. So after he was arrested, Mosquera made a couple of claims. He claimed that Alfonso had killed Longworth, and that he had killed Alfonso because he had been scared. So it was more self-defense. This isn't possible because Alfonso was at work. He also tried to claim that Alfonso had sexually assaulted him. This is where the information about him being paid came up. And it is possible to be sexually assaulted as a sex worker. Just because you consent to have sex with someone doesn't mean you consent to all of the sexual acts that they could possibly perform. However, as I said, there is a lot of video evidence, and it was very obvious to the police that he was not being assaulted. He had consented to the acts that he was taking part in. Looking at the details of the trial, though, I found it really weird that they actually found a guy who is only known as James Smith. His actual identity has been kept secret. But he claimed that when he was 17 or 18, so nearly 20 years ago, he had actually met Alfonso at a rugby match. They had drunk a lot together, and he had gone back to Alfonso's flat. The next morning he woke up with a horrendous hangover, and no recollection of what had happened the night before, to which Alfonso had then shown him a video of him on all four being penetrated by Alfonso. And James Smith said that this was horrifying because he was, at the time, he wasn't even sure if he was gay. And then to make matters even worse, Alfonso then apparently blackmailed him into having a sexual relationship with him. Now, I don't know how truthful these claims are. Alfonso can't be put on trial for his actions because he was killed. But I did find it quite interesting that they were in the case. However, with all the evidence put forward, Mosquera was found guilty of both murders. But the judge actually postponed the sentencing so that he could have a psychiatric evaluation. The doctor who performed the evaluation came back and said that there was no mental disease that would have that caused him to perform these acts. There were a couple of things that happened in his childhood that could be seen as reasons for parts of his personality. Like he saw other children killed in front of him as a child, and this could have been part of the reason for the way he viewed violence, and his lack of empathy. However, nothing could be seen as a medical disease for a reason for the way that he acted. So on October 24th, which is literally a couple of weeks ago, which is why I wanted to get this video made, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, but he does have a minimum sentence of 40 years. Should he ever get released from prison, he will be extradited back to Colombia. This story is terrifying. We make friends with people online all the time. As I said, I've met people, I've met my partners. You take a big risk when you meet people. But then saying that, you take a big risk when you meet someone in the pub. Dharma met people in bars and look what he did. So I think it's just terrifying knowing what humans are capable of. And the idea that he had a 12-year relationship with these men before killing them it makes it harder, because he wasn't a stranger or he wasn't a new acquaintance. He was someone that these guys have been talking to for years. They've shared secrets. They will have all talked about problems in their lives, and it's as if nothing from those 12 years mattered to Mosquera. He was very financially orientated. I fully believe that if he'd been able to, obviously he wouldn't have been, but if he'd been able to, he would have tried to sell the flat. He would have tried to get all of the money that he possibly could have got. And I find that very, very sad. Like, money's tight for a lot of people, but to kill just for the intention of taking their money, it's disgraceful and it's horrifying. And these poor guys, they were just, they thought they'd met somebody that they connected with. They thought they'd met somebody who they were enjoying life with. They had no idea what Mosquera had planned for them, and it's horrible. But that is the end of Yostin Mosquera case. Thank you for watching the video. I do appreciate you taking the time to join me on this case. If you enjoyed watching, please remember to hit the like and the subscribe buttons. Please feel free to drop any cases in the comments that you would like me to cover. Until next time, remember to look after each other, stay safe, and I will see you in the next video.